Hello, everyone. I think we're ready to get started. Hello, I'm Jody Delaney. I'm the Executive Director of the Television Academy Foundation. I want to thank you for joining us for a conversation with industry professionals about how they use the power of sound to tell stories. We're joined today by some extraordinary Emmy nominees. Jose Araujo, he's a production mixer for Tiger King. Logan Byers, the sound supervisor on Cheer. Bonnie Wild, who's a re-recording mixer and sound effects editor for The Mandalorian, and Joe Earl, who was the re-recording mixer on Hollywood. Joe is also a governor for the Television Academy Sound Peer Group and a good friend of the foundation, so I want to welcome everyone. Our moderator today is Glenn Kaiser. He's the director of the Dolby Institute, and that is Dolby's initiative to bring education and inspiration to filmmakers and artists about the creative use of sound and image in storytelling. Glenn also hosts the Dolby Institute podcast, which is now in its 6th season, and that features in-depth conversations with artists about how they use technology, if you haven't tuned into that before. So before I turn it over to Glenn to introduce our panel and start the conversation, I want to thank him and Dolby Laboratories for presenting this panel with us. We really do appreciate Dolby's long-term partnership and support of the foundation and all that they do to support storytelling. So please use the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. I think you're all familiar with that. It's down at the bottom. You can submit your questions there for our panelists at any time during the discussion. Glenn might weave some of your questions into it or address them towards the end of the panel. So it will be easy, it'll be fun, and I want to thank you all for being here. Take it away, Glenn.
Awesome. Jody, thanks so much for that introduction. That was really fantastic. Appreciate it. Indeed, I'm the director of the Dolby Institute, and I'm thrilled to be here with these amazing Emmy nominees in the sound categories this year. If my esteemed panelists can unmute their microphones and their videos, and there we go. Here we all are. Fantastic. It's great to be here with everyone. I do want to just thank Jody and our friends at the Television Academy Foundation for putting this together. We got to have a little pre-meet conversation a couple of days ago, and it was lively and fun. So I think we're going to be in for a fun conversation today. And yeah, let's just jump right into it, because I know we only have an hour, and we have 4 amazing artists who have all worked on very, very different kinds of shows. So I really just wanted to start, because I know that there are a lot of alumni and students of the Television Academy Foundation programs that are tuning in today. I really just want to take a second and ask each of you super quickly if we could just hear a little bit about your superhero origin story, how you got started in the business, what kind of ignited this passion for you about sound, and maybe like who some of your influences and mentors have been. Jose, I'd love to start with you.
Okay. Well, I come from a small town in rural Northeast Brazil, and when I was growing up, there was no electricity, so means no TV, no movies, until I was like 9 years old. So listening was one of the things we could do. I mean, there was radio too, because people ran radios on batteries. So I think that made me think of sound, because you had to interpret those sounds that we're listening in the darkness or at night. And so I always understood, I began understanding the power of sound very early. And then as it developed, I went on to school and I bought a recorder and began recording music and religious rituals. And then after going to film school, I started to develop this skill more, learning about the machines and all the tools that you need for recording sound, and listening to experts. And since it was a film school, we had to watch movies and analyze the tracks. And one of my, I think, big influences was this French filmmaker called Bresson, who used a lot of off-screen sound to show places. There's a famous scene of a film he did, Pickpocket, which is in a horse track, and then you were there, the guy is stealing money from people, and you hear the racetrack, but you never see the actual racetrack. And throughout his films, he used this kind of technique a lot. And and it shows what sound can do. You know, you can create big environments and without seeing visually, and because people have the references. And then right after film school, I began working in different projects. I was lucky to know a cameraman who used to travel throughout Latin America, and I began working in documentaries, expedition documentaries, and recording nature sounds was one of the first tasks I had to do for these, and which was a cool thing, you know, recording jungles and waterfalls and birds and animals. And so later I got into doing narrative films, and then it was a different experience altogether. And you learn more how to work in a big team and to be part of a whole setup in which sound is just one department. It's not as present as when you're doing smaller, like documentaries or TV. And so the last few years, that's what I've been doing, recording films, mainly documentaries after I moved to New York, and TV programs.
I was about to say, it's almost, you've almost come full circle back into the world of documentary filmmaking again, which is great.
Yeah, it was, yeah.
Logan, I'd love to hear from you. I can tell that, good, you just unmuted yourself, so that we can hear you now.
So I started off as a musician, super young. First instrument was the saxophone. And once I got the saxophone, music kind of took off from there. I learned, all the other instruments, got into high school, and I worked at an elementary school. That was like my evening job. And on the computers there, when I would do computer class, GarageBand was this little program. I saw a guitar and I'm like, ooh, I like guitars. What is this? And that was the first time I'd ever seen any kind of DAW or workstation. And so, of course, I started making beats with my friends, things like that, and getting into music and understanding how the basics of that work. But at the same time in high school, I was in the animation program with some amazing animators. And then when we would finish our projects, we were like, well, what do we do now? And I was like, well, I can put some music to it. And so I would start putting music to it, but it seemed like it was lacking something. So I had the Apple Loops, sound effect library. So I would start putting those kind of sound effects in there. And that's kind of how it started. And then I realized, I think I want to do music for film. That was my original goal. So I started, studying more music, ended up going to the Art Institute and fully focusing on music. And then when I took an intro to sound design class, for me, it was like, this is what I want to do for sure. Just creating these fantastic worlds with nothing. And so during college, I started working professionally before I even finished school, because I had a couple people tell me, if you really want to get a job, you want to start working now, not when you finish college. So I hustled really hard. I took jobs on Craigslist for people that needed sound boom operators, people to write music, sound effects for short films. And, I was getting paid nothing or, very, very little. But I was able to build a resume and build up my reel. I snuck on to CalArts campus and I posted flyers for, sound design, because CalArts has some of the best animators in the world. They go to Pixar, they go to Disney. I thought, I want to work on some of these cool projects, these thesis films that these students get to, present to these amazing places. And so that's what I did. I snuck on campus and I put my stuff on a wall along with a bunch of other people, and I started getting these calls, and just the content I was getting was just amazing. These people were super talented. And when you get something that's super creative, it just gets you more excited. So then I started, doing more sound design that way, became a freelance dialogue editor for several studios. Which dialogue editing was not my favorite, but it was something that I think I really needed to learn in order to do sound design and understand how those two work together. And then I got headhunted by Brian Reardon. He's the owner at Levels Audio, which is where I work now. And so he called me and asked if I would be interested in being their in-house sound designer there. And I said, yeah. And so that's where I'm at now. And I get to work on amazing content with amazing people. So.
Well, that's great. Joe, let's hear from you.
Yeah, well, a lot like Logan, I just kind of hustled my way along, and even in film school, everybody wants to be a director or producer, and nobody wanted to do sound. So even before I got into the film school, I was at USC, but I would go to the film school and volunteer, and they would always stick me in the sound and say, here, just cut some sound for this, cut some sound for that. So as my skills kind of matured, you know, my fascination for sound kind of grew. And when I got out of school, you know, I went looking for jobs, and most of the jobs that I could find were in sound, which kind of figured everybody wanted to be a director or a producer. And so I got a lot of work. And then there was a strike, and there was a lot of independent filmmaking, but no, you know, union filmmaking. So I cut a lot of low budget horror movies and a lot of really bad movies and bad TV, and worked my way up until I found a friend at Tadeo who got me a job there. And that place at the time was just swarming with the best mixers and the best editor in town. So, you know, I'd go in on any stage and sit down next to Chris Jenkins or Scott Milan or Greg Russell or, you know, Anna Belmer, Doug Hemphill. You know, you could just go in and sit down next to them and talk to them and watch them work, and just fueled my fire to, you know, really do more with the materials that I had. And so working as a sound editor there, you know, I really tried my best to cut the right thing, give them the right material, go to the stage and see what they did with it. And I wound up here.
That's great. That's great. Bonnie, I want to hear your story, and I'll just acknowledge. I think you're coming to us from your mixing room at Skywalker Sound, where you're working maybe on season 2 of The Mandalorian.
Maybe. Yeah. This is my lunch hour. It will probably be representative of the middle of the day, and yeah. Well, I mean, I started like 17 years ago. I in England, obviously. I mean, much like these guys, I was a musician originally, but my dad was a dubbing mixer. He worked in TV in England, so I knew that the job existed, which is like part of the problem, really. Like a lot of people don't know that this is a job. So I knew this was a job. And I used to like spend summers with my dad at work. He would shove me in the back room, the freezing machine room. I'd lay some stuff up, you know, Chinagraph, whatever needed to be done. Clean a console when they were done with the mix and stuff. He showed me all the very unglamorous parts of the work, and I kind of always thought I wanted to work in music production. But kind of when I got into studying, I was like, I don't know, I don't think this is what I want to do. And so I studied music. I did a music degree, but I would always do the tech parts of it. So, you know, of age, I learned Cubase, things like that. You know, very useful. And then when I left college, I really wanted to get a job at, like, you know, we had a local post house. And so I kind of, again, hustled. This was pre-internet. And so I would have to just mail letters to like nameless person at thing. My dad would say that he didn't know anyone. He would always say, I don't know anyone. I don't know anyone.
He refused to help you.
Yeah, I think it really irked me at the time. It turns out he did know somebody, but he just wouldn't. But I think it's because he knew, essentially, he didn't want people to think I'd got in because, like, my dad had given me the name of someone. I think he could probably foresee that, you know, maybe there would be reasons that I wouldn't get taken particularly as serious as maybe other peers. And he was like, no, you've got to get in there by yourself. And so I did. I just wrote endless letters until I got an interview there. So I worked at this place, ITV Leeds in England. I made tea. I made tea for months. It's what we do in England. We make tea for everyone, tapes everywhere, do all those things. But like the other runners there wanted to be directors and editors and everything. And I was like, well, I want to work in the sound department. And so then eventually a job came up in the sound department. And then I did what Joe did. I mean, I just, as the assistant in the sound department, you mix the Foley, but you're just observing a lot. You know, you're listening and you're figuring out what the mixers are doing. And I was really lucky. I worked with mixers who would be really generous with their knowledge, you know. And like my boss, like Adam Severs there, he would kind of like spill a fader over to me, and he, you know, it was on the DFC, and I could watch what was going on, you know, how he was, you know, cleaning up the dialogue and everything, and stuff like that. And we'd switch seats, and he'd be like, okay, you clean up the dialogue here. And, you know, I'd get, you know, we had the Cedar and the Dolby unit and everything, and we'd just go through and clean everything up. And I wanted to work at Skywalk.
Yeah, I remember.
I'm
cheating a little bit because Bonnie did a great talk on our podcast. Remember, you started off in the machine room. You just kind of worked your way. You know, got any way you could, and then worked your way
just figure out how to get to America, how to do that, how to. Again, I mean, I just started again when I got here. It's like, okay, go back into the machine room, you know, and just like start again. But totally worth it, because Skywalker, man, it's great.
Well, that's great. I want to jump into talking about the shows and the reason why all of you amazing artists are nominated for Emmys. And Jose, I got to start with you, because Tiger King just, I think, really captivated everybody's imagination, and it came out at the perfect time when we were all going into COVID lockdown and we were spending a lot of time at home. And I think we all got riveted by this kind of just crazy story of these amazing characters. And I wanted to ask you, so you do production sound mixing. So you're on the set, you're recording with camera. And obviously there were a lot of interviews balanced with a lot of archival footage in the show. So how long were you on Tiger King, and were you there for all of the interviews, or how did it flow? Because I know they were shooting on that for a long time, right?
Right. Myself, I was on and off for like 2 years. And you know, it was very interesting. The first time the producer approached me was the film has two directors. So one of them called me, and she got my reference here in New York and asked me if I was comfortable to work near big cats, you know, if I had done before, because we'd be in close contact. And then I thought for a moment that I'd been in many situations. I've been traveling and filming nature, but never really got that close to cats as I did in this film. So say yes, and that sounded very interesting, and the opportunity to be there. At first I thought it was gonna be about big cats. I didn't really, I think the film was, as we began, it was still developing and what it has become. But so the moment you get one of these, you know, the first place I went was in South Carolina, and then the moment you get outside one of the zoos, they're usually near some country road. You go in, you start already hearing roars of big animals, of lions and tigers. So you go in, and then all of a sudden you start to meet the characters, and then you'll see what they are too. They are, and I guess people who get into that activity, they have to be very special too, because these zoos are like show. They make shows too, so it's a mixture of zoo and show house, and so they are very different, and had many different situations which were interesting, like when recording sound, you have your windscreen. I was always told to hide the windscreen below, because sometimes they go on parade with these big animals, a handler holding the animal, but if they saw something fuzzy or hairy, like a microphone like that, they could come and attack it.
Oh, they would think it was an animal and they would come
yeah,
after it.
Would do. So I was always kind of have to stay in the back hiding my microphone. And also like filming, another situation, we were filming the couple had two adult chimps. So they were having dinner together, the four of them. So also that kind of situation, we had to keep our faces down, never look up to the chimp's eyes. So as always, there was some kind of tension when near the animals. But overall was, I I think it was one of the most interesting films I've worked on because of that, you know, for the contact with big animals like that. And also a lot of American culture, this kind of culture, Americana, right, that you don't see everywhere if you live in California, New York. And you see these guys that are down in the middle of nowhere, but they develop these characters probably out of TV, and they are very flamboyant. And it was fun to work on it too. The film was like peeling an onion, you know, each time would, and the director had a big skill in dealing with characters. And he also had big knowledge about cats and animals, wild animals, wildlife. So it was a big discovery. Doing the interviews, they were long, and you'd see how the thing would evolve. They would reveal facets of themselves that were very interesting. And I think the film took a lot from those interviews and went into, it was always very fast. We'd go in and there were activities, we had to jump, mic people had to work really close to the camera, you know, because a lot of situations had two cameras because things happened too quickly. And it was like that all the way to the end. It was very, always very exciting because you were there. There was that kind of sense of danger too. And I had a chance to record a lot of roars, you know, when during feeding time, they were very noisy, the big cats. So it was a good opportunity to have to record that.
So how did you approach it? Did you have most everyone on wireless mics, and then you also had booms, or were you hiding microphones kind of around the set, or how did you approach it?
Usually we'd follow, you know, there were the sit-down interviews, and then we'd, for the very test scenes, would wire the characters, the main characters that we were following. They were doing some activity. They were touring the campus, the zoo, or they were feeding the animals, and they were having conversations with workers there or visitors. So it was a combination of wireless and for the characters and boom for the other people that came around and talked to them. But we had to be quick, you know, always happening very fast.
Of course.
Like, yeah, I had to predict a lot of situations. I had sometimes to jump because all these fences were protected, and these people, we had to follow them wherever they went. So sometimes they would go into these enclaves that the public couldn't go, but we could go very close.
Were you in the pens with some of the tigers?
No, we're not. I mean, there was just a little fence like between us and the tigers. So sometimes once in a downtime, we were waiting for something, and I was started with my iPhone filming this tiger, big male tiger, and then you know, they're so amazing. They have no fear of humans. Right? They come to you, they ignore you, they don't even look at you, they pass through you. But I was very, you know, having fun filming the other tiger, drinking water, playing. All of a sudden he lifted his tail and sprayed on my face. It was a big surprise I had with the tiger. I guess I was there for too long. He felt I was part of his territory.
You needed to be marked.
I needed to be marked. And there were many interesting situations. Like one of the characters riding an elephant through his neighborhood, you know, was like very surreal. Had a lot of surreal scenes like that.
Yeah, I just had this image of you, you know, obviously you originally come from Brazil. I had this image of you just like on the set with your recording unit, just with your headphones, just shaking your head at this insanity that was unfolding in front of you.
Yeah, it was really insane.
Well, this is a rare opportunity because when we have these post-production conversations, it's so rare, and it's such a treat to have the production sound mixer with us. My fellow post-production people, do you have any questions for Jose, or any long-standing things bones you want to pick with the production sound mixer?
Well, no, I mean, like, can we have the tiger recordings? We all want the tiger recordings now.
That's right, yeah. No, we had a lot of that. Them pacing, them drinking water, them doing all kinds of stuff, and really close. Swimming, there were a lot of tigers swimming.
Awesome.
Yeah. But that, you know, sometimes you work like that, you have to make decisions yourself with sounds to get. Sometimes the producers, directors, they're not really thinking of sound, and they're thinking more about content and image. So you kind of have to almost take that role to think of the sound, which is good. I don't
Would they give you time to get the wild tracks and stuff?
Yeah, there is time, and I know how important the wild tracks are. You know, I learned very young. I was telling about myself when I was young, you know, listening just to wild tracks, and you listen to them in an abstract way, right? And you know that those sounds you can use in many different situations to create a certain mood or state of minds. So I think it's the most fun is to record that.
I have a question. How long were the takes? This guy seemed to go on and on and on forever. Were you always rolling? Were you
always rolling? It was like the whole thing was to always roll, because they would just, you know, they were wired and they were, something could happen anytime. So we just had to roll all the time.
Would you just wire them all up? Would you just like mic them all up and then just like?
Well, the main characters, I would wire them. Yeah, you have to. Yeah, and then just other people that they met on their way in their walkings, and then we would try to get with the boom.
Yeah.
There was no tiger around or big cat, otherwise they would. No, it was a very interesting. It was as interesting as the film came out. It was the opportunity to meet all those kind of characters you don't meet in your normal life.
Yeah. Did you have any idea that it was going to have the impact that it did when it came out?
No, I knew there was something very special, but I didn't know there was going to be so, you know, popular. And it's all over the world. A lot of people saw it in Brazil. Yeah, it's not only here. And I know in the UK too, I heard people. It was very popular there.
Well,
too.
like you say, yeah, like that part of American culture is kind of, I mean, I know when I watched it, like, what is this?
I know.
Well, I've spent my entire life here, and I was shocked and disturbed by it as well. So.
Yeah, I'm gonna say that's not a full collection of American culture at the.
But
but specific kind of thing, like, right? Zoo owner. I mean, you don't think that those people exist, but then after you realize that there's so many of them, there are so many of these zoos in the country.
Yeah.
The U.S. has the largest tiger population in the world, and a lot of them are under private hands. Yes, people like having those animals.
Well, that actually, I think makes a great segue into another story of a very specific American culture that we probably didn't know much about before we started to watch it. And Logan, I'm going to turn to you to talk a little bit about Cheer. So this is a 6-hour multi-part documentary on Netflix as well about collegiate, cheerleading. And I can honestly say I knew very, very little about it before I started this show. So I'm kind of curious, you know, you're the sound designer and the supervising sound editor on the show. And I think for most people who aren't in our industry, when they kind of come to a piece of content like Cheer, which is on the face of it, a pretty straightforward documentary about kind of a process documentary following people as they go through this. I think that they may not really be thinking about what the creative sound work that goes into that. So can you talk a little bit about Cheer and Cheer specifically, but also I'm really curious about the role of sound design and kind of abstract sound in documentary film.
Sure. Well, first of all, I can agree with you. I knew nothing about collegiate cheerleading. And I think like they talk about in the first episode, they talk about how most people have this view of what cheerleading is, being on the sidelines for football games. So it was a very big shock, you know, as the episodes kept coming out and just the insane of the athletes that they were. But yeah, for that one, it is a very different approach than something that's scripted, because we're trying to go for something that sounds very realistic, but it can't be so realistic that it doesn't sound, there's nothing interesting about it. There still needs to be moments that pop. There still needs to be moments that capture your ear. So our dialogue editor, Caleb, did a fantastic job of being able to help bridge that gap as well. Because a lot of the moments take place while they're in an auditorium, and it's like chaos, as you can see. There's people on the sidelines yelling. There's people jumping, tumbling. The sound of the lights was a pretty big thing in a lot of our tracks. And so being able to clean up that and have control over how much lights are we going to have, you know, when there's quiet moments, that can be part of it where, you know, it's really quiet now. So now we're hearing the lights. Now we're hearing, you know, other people breathing instead of just a wall of sound. So that was a cool thing to be able to do, was to be able to take different moments of people chatting and enter those in as there's things on the screen happening right in front of you. Otherwise it gets kind of sucked out and you lose a lot of that detail. A lot of it is also up to the client too. So you can kind of have one way where they want things that are really sound design heavy, and there's a lot of whooshes and these slow motion shots, you hear some cool sounds. This one was not, you know, approached that way. They wanted to be very, very, very documentary focused. Like, this is what's happening. So with that one, we had to do a lot of work on the backgrounds and really figure out what backgrounds are going to work. And the way we do our backgrounds, they are very specific, and we're choosing different layers that obviously are not going to collide with each other, but thinking about where they are in Texas, you know, what time of day it is, like what kind of sounds the crickets are making at this hour opposed to this hour. So really paying attention to a lot of those nuances that I think the average person may not pay attention to. Mm-hmm. But I think for us, it really helped feel the atmosphere, because a lot of the interviews that you see there, it's very dry, it's quiet. There's this really beautiful music underneath. And so we really wanted to make sure that those places felt authentic. And even with, once again, going back to the auditorium, we had to really make decisions. Are we going to use the lav here, or are we using the boom? Because if we use the lav, now we're losing the sound of the room. Because what this person's talking about is very important, but we can't lose the sound of the room. And so, as most of you guys know, when you're mixing lavs and boom, you can start running into phasing problems. So we had to really focus on what's the important part here, and are we going to have the sounds of the backgrounds from the boom in there, or are we going to make those ourselves because it's too loud and we really need to focus on what this person's saying. So yeah, it was a cool challenge. It was fun to be able to bring those moments in. But I know one thing you wanted to talk about was the sound of these cheerleaders, hitting and these impacts. And
so I gotta set this up. This is insane. So we were talking about this earlier, and you see these shots of these guys, and they're looking up in the air, and they're like, "What are they looking up in the air?" And then suddenly this girl just drops into. And I was listening to it on headphones. And I was like, you clearly cut some sweeteners and bumped up the sounds of those impacts when those girls would hit. But I loved your explanation of it, because that's not what they were miking for, so they didn't get it. Right.
So when we use the lav mic, when we use the lav mic on that, you can definitely hear that these girls are hitting so hard. That's why in the show you see a lot of them are talking about their ribs hurting. And so with the lav, it was unusable. It was just this really awful garbled mess. So sometimes we use that if it works, but usually we use boom on that. But then at that moment, we have no impact. And when it's all about storytelling. As they're talking about how hard they're hitting and why they're hurting, it calls itself that we need to add, these sweeteners in there, because it helps tell the story. And the first couple of times we watched it, even though we're cutting sounds to it, I'm just grimacing, like, these are rough. So not even just the impacts as they're all on the floor, as they're doing flips and tumbles, recovering all their feet, hitting those moments when they're popping up, spinning, and then landing, just because a lot of that wasn't caught, or it was just too light, and we needed to have some weight to it. So that's what we're adding, high-end sweeteners of the cloth and their feet touching, but then we're also adding the low impact as well, because underneath that little tiny pad is just hardwood floor. And so, that resonates as well.
I love that. I think that, most people have no idea that all that work is going into it. But you said something that I thought was really great too, which is like the client also is really important in terms of, establishing those moments for you to have abstract sound design. One of the things that really caught my ear about Cheer was dynamics and how you alternated, very, very, live moments. I think there was a moment in episode 4 where there was sort of a dramatic kind of emotional moment, and then you needed as an audience member, you needed a little beat. And right then was a montage of them coming into the gym late at night and just turning on lights.
Yeah.
And it was this beautiful, like, I don't know, 10, 15 seconds of just lights coming on. And you guys covered that with sound effects really, really just nicely. And it made such a melancholy moment with sound effects, which was just fantastic.
And we get excited for those moments, even though it seems super simple. It's just a empty room with, you know, lights. You know, there's still a lot of thoughts, you know, that go into that. And the other sound editor, Sean, you know, really did a good job with having, you know, fluorescent lights that came on, you know, right away, but then you're still hearing the ping and being able to get those panned, you know, the right way where, oh, you're hearing a little bit of ping over here and this one's on, you know, over here, but now you're hearing the reverberance of, you know, the pinging. And it was just an exciting moment. And it's very simple, but as a sound person, you know, it's just so satisfying when you hear it completed, and especially once it was mixed, you know, it sounded incredible.
Well, I wanted to give you a chance to talk about as well, because obviously you're nominated for episode 6, which is the Big Climax episode. Yeah. So it's you know, you've been, this entire series is building towards this 1 2-minute and 15-second competition in Daytona, Florida, and then you get into the episode and you learn that the company that controls this whole competition didn't allow them access to shoot the competition. Right. So apparently the workaround was they just sent a ton of people in there with iPhones to capture it. And that's the climax of the show. So you had all this iPhone material coming in. How did you build that sequence?
Yeah, so that was kind of that was a surprise. And, you know, I was spotting it and I saw that tag come up. And I said, surely that's not really what it means. And then, you know, I see the footage and, you know, the footage looks fine, and then you see the one track of that, the only track you get of, you know, iPhone audio. And, you know, we reach out to production. Do you guys have anything else? Were there any mics at all? That's literally what you got. And so, you know, the problem with that is, as most of the viewers know, is when you're shooting with an iPhone, you know, now you have a lot of people talking off axis, and a lot of those things are important. And so subtitles did have to be inserted on some of them where there was just, they weren't even close to being on the mic, but it was a challenge. And one thing that our dialogue editor did that really helped was he found, you know, pulling handles out on some of this footage, he was able to find moments of essentially like loop-proof wallet-type stuff that fit with the production really, really well that we could use to help fill in some of those gaps and kind of overlap things. One of the hardest parts, of course, is when they're actually on stage and you have, you know, iPhone footage and there is music pumping. There is, you know, 1,000 girls and men screaming as loud as they can. And we still have to hear everything. But when you listen to the guide, it sounds rough. It is a wall of noise. And so we had to build a little bit more of, once again, their performance, and kind of bring those things, you know, that audio down, use some of those crowd swells that we had captured earlier when there was no music, so we could just kind of implement those. And then once again, you know, sweeten all the footsteps, all of the hits, all of the landings, you know, all of that stuff had to be covered because it all needed to pop through. Because without it, it seemed odd. It just looked like music with screaming, with people running, and you're seeing them hit hard and there's just nothing there. Yeah. So it was definitely a challenge, but I think it turned out fantastic. And I was pretty excited once our mixer touched it and did some stuff to help that music pop out even more without making everything loud. So it was a lot of fun. It was also just a shock. It was a shock going from this beautiful, you know, 4K footage and, you know, these amazing production mixers than to, you know, students with iPhones running around. And so, yeah, it was a big contrast, but I think we bridged that gap well.
It was amazing how well it worked. When I read that, I thought, oh, this could be just a disaster, but it really, you still got the emotion of the moment.
Cool.
Joe, I want to talk with you about Hollywood. This is, I really enjoyed this show. It was kind of was a really lovely kind of reimagining about post-World War II Hollywood and kind of what life was like back then, but with a much more socially progressive theme, obviously, than what was reflected in real life. Can you talk about like when you've obviously worked with Ryan Murphy quite a bit in the past, but what was your first reaction to the material, and how did you respond to those themes?
Oh, I think you know, the time that I spent with Ryan, and I've been with him since he finished Nip Tuck. And he was a no sound guy, but I think there's a running theme that goes throughout every show that he does. And I think it has to do with the fact that we're all the same. You can be black, brown, white, Asian, you can be gay, straight, trans, whatever. We all have really interesting stories to tell. And he really pays little attention, or maybe he's paying a lot of attention to the fact that he can put people in those situations and tell the same story, and it's universal. So it's really interesting too, because this panel shows the power of sound, because Logan and Jose have to add sound to make it more real, and we have to add sound sometimes to make it less real. So in Hollywood, it is a reimagining. It's like Ryan's kind of Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, where if Hollywood were accepting to everyone, it could have been like this or like that. So in fact, loud sounds, musical transitions really help emphasize the period and the changes. I mean, a lot of times Ryan would just pick another song to go behind a scene change or a sequence change. And it was more about taking that song and either playing it big as the transition and then weaving it into the scene as a source piece, or it was about hitting the next scene transition with something iconic from the period. So you had all the glitz and glamour of Hollywood, you had the beautiful photography, but when it came to nailing the period, we, with the help of our sound supervisor, Gary McGregor, really stressed how to hit these transitions with something that said, okay, we're in the 1940s, okay, we're in the 1930s, you know, to really help us along and keep us in there, but not get in the way of the fantasy. So I think the themes that play through are unique to Ryan. And I think, you know, we just push the show along and try not to get in the way of the theme.
Yeah. Has Ryan's approach to, you know, storytelling through sound evolved over the years that you work with him? I tend to, I tend to think, you know, obviously with something like Glee, that's a very musically driven show, but some of the American Horror Story stuff is much more sound effects driven. So how has his approach changed over the years that you've worked with him?
Well, interesting that you say that, because Nip Tuck was literally dialogue and music. There were maybe some door closes, maybe a phone, and that was it. I remember the first episode of Glee, I listened to the picture editor's cut of it, and I was listening, and Ryan was in the room, and he's like, what's that? What's that sound? And I said, that's room tone. Take it out, get rid of it, take it out. And we went from there to where we were with Glee, where every transition was hit you over the head with it. And then American Horror Story became more of a cornucopia of sound design, sound effects, vocal treatments, and music. And it all had to play at the same time. But remember, Ryan is a writer. Right. So Ryan wants to hear every single word that he's written. And we have to play all of that stuff, get the sound to enhance this horrific thing, and yet still be able to come back, back up to hear his line of dialogue. I mean, I'm sure Bonnie goes through the same thing all the time. I'm sure each and every one of us. I think it's really interesting too that, you know, there's certain themes that you work with, and sometimes the composer picks up on that theme and carries it through, and sometimes it's a sound effect. And you know, so for us, we can kind of poke at a thematic thing. In Horror Story, we got to play our themes. In Asylum, there are certain screams that play throughout the entire series that we come back around to time and time again. And once we do that with the help of the composer, then you have a more thematic story that's playing underneath the dialogue the whole time. So it's a multi-level thing. I think we as sound designers and sound mixers are as much storytellers as the picture editor is, as the writer is. We just have to find the room to fit it in there. One of the things that I'm impressed about Mandalorian is that you have this kind of Sergio Leone thing that Ludwig did in the music. And then I'm like, is that sound design or is that score or what? I gotta ask Bonnie about this. You know, and the next thing you know, you're in this tremendous fight scene, which is, it's awesome. It's really great.
Bonnie, you want to take that?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think probably in a lot of those moments, it's like, it's just making the decision about how everything's going to sit with each other. So like definitely, certainly when you're dealing with like something that's so effects heavy as I think Star Wars in general is, you've got to be really careful to just not exhaust your audience with one thing or the other. You know, if you just like go at it like a powerhouse of music from beginning to end, that's going to be exhausting. If you go at it with sound effects from beginning to end, it's exhausting. If you go at it with both of them continuously all the time, it's exhausting. So you've got to you just got to find that shape. And so for a lot of those moments, it's like, is the music part of the backgrounds here? Like essentially, you know, it's kind of going to sit in with that thing, and it's going to, you've just got, it's just figuring out like what, like Joe says, what is going to tell the story at what point. You know, it's how to support everything that's going on. Like the show has existed up until the point it's come to sound perfectly well. Do you know what I mean? You don't want to, you're not kind of going in there like, well, sound is going to figure everything out here. It's like everything else is doing its job, and you've just got to do yours to fit in with, you know, the story. So yeah, certainly that moment, it's like, are we waiting on some kind of tension? You know, if you play something too soon or too big, you're going to like ruin that moment. So it's just, you know, I kind of go with that thing is like sitting back on something is just as important as just like pushing on it, you know. So and certainly with like the first season of The Mandalorian, that was like a lot of just figuring everything out. It's like, you know, we all kind of show up to it like new, do you know what I mean? Like on your first day of school, it's like, okay, what have I got? who's doing what have I got to like weave together? And it's kind of like figuring out. I mean, I did like have Ludwig's demos and stuff, and you know, obviously temp music and stuff when I was cutting, which is useful, so I can kind of reference what's going to be what. I mean, really at that time you kind of take things with a pinch of salt though as well. Do you know what I mean?
Well, Bonnie, I did want to ask you about that because, you know, obviously you're building something new, but that lives in the Star Wars universe. And we all know very well what the Star Wars universe sounds like. And it's interesting that you brought up music, because I think of, you know, Star Wars movies, if the movie is 120 minutes long, there's going to be 118 minutes of John Williams score.
119
minutes. Yeah, exactly. So, but you got to rethink all those decisions for Mandalorian, like, and in some cases you kept things that are very familiar with the Star Wars universe, but then you went in very different directions. So can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, well, I think what's great in general, as well as when you're dealing with TV for a start, and then when you're dealing with like a franchise that's got like a new format, is you got a bit more that, you know, you can kind of take more liberties with it, and everybody feels a bit freer to to try stuff out. Dave Filoni certainly will always just be like, let's try this without the music. You're like, well, not really, you know. It's like, well, once upon a time it existed like that, but I got to put all that back together now. You know what I mean? So that you know, there was a lot of playing with that. You know, there are certain rules that you kind of you kind of follow when you're dealing with Star Wars. Certain things sound like certain things, and certain things sound like certain things, and then, you know, you've got to just figure out how to like happily put it together. So you never want anything to feel like, or you're just, I don't know, like redoing stuff all the time. Do you know what I mean? It's got to be its own thing. And for The Mandalorian, that was certainly like, it's going to be its own thing, but it's going to fit within this galaxy as well. And I think what was great, I mean, the music was so successful because it was I mean, I think it was great because it was so different. It was like, this is great, and it had its own personality. It felt like its own character. Do you know what I mean? When you deal with it, you put it in and you just like go for it. I mean, you know, you dance around sometimes to it. I'm not gonna lie, you go a bit crazy sometimes. You know, it's just, you've been here by yourself for a long time. You know, kind of kick it up. You're like, this is cool, man. I'll go for it.
Bonnie, who did the weapons? Because they really sounded unique. I mean, they didn't sound anything like any of the movies. Did you design all that stuff?
No, Dave Acord. So Dave Acord did all the design for stuff, and Dave's done, you know, so much stuff.
He's been in Star Wars for a long time.
Yeah, he's like, yeah. And, you know, and for a lot of that, like, you know, a lot of the stuff Dave, you know, designed from his amazing brain for The Mandalorian, and then other stuff we will, you know, source as well. I mean, we've got to be resourceful. Like, we're still dealing with a, you know, television budget. So, you know, it's not every single thing you see is new. It's like, well, we know we can deal with this from here. So, and a lot of the times when I cut, because I work with Matt and Dave quite a lot, it's a case of like, well, I'll do it, and then it'll be a case of like, you know, putting my hand up and ask for something. You know, I'll be like, hi, maybe this here or something. But yeah, no, certainly like all Mando's weapons, all his new gear and everything, Dave made all of that stuff. It's so cool. It does sound really cool.
I had a question for you. I know you guys mixed this one in 7.1.2, right? Or
yeah.
How did that, being able to storytell, you know, using that platform, kind of expand a little bit more than just this typical 5.1 or 7.1?
Logan, I just want to acknowledge that I love you for asking the Dolby Atmos question for me. I did not plant that, but I do appreciate it. Thank you.
No problem.
Well, yeah, I mean, I did use it. I used it a lot. I mean, I really enjoy it. I am again this season as well. It's like, oh, hi. I mean, it's great just for, I find for like, just like the immersive kind of space, you know, and for getting movement as well. I'm kind of, you know, addicted to large panning and stuff. So all of that helps with it, you know. Overhead ships. Who doesn't love an overhead ship? But just for stuff like tension as well, like where you're putting something can really like help with the tension. I mean, it sounds great in stereo, I'm sure, but like, you know, just you know, I don't know, everything's always back here when it's scary. Do you know what I mean? It's like, ooh, and up there, you know, wildlife is going crazy up here and everything like that. But I mean, I love mixing with it. It folds down easy. I fold it kind of down, not fully into the back, but just like, you know, just close to it.
Yeah, Glenn, I have to say that I think that Atmos is spectacular for what we're trying to do, because with the streaming platforms, we're able to stream uncompressed digital, so it sounds just like it should. like it did on the dub stage, which has always been the bane of our existence as re-recording mixers.
Yeah.
But the fact that we have more room for the dialogue, we have more room for the music, we can spread things out, environments can be wide and huge, and you can still hear everything.
Yeah.
I think it's really enhanced what we do and what we're able to deliver. You know, fortunately, I think people are out there and they're starting to catch on, maybe not as quickly as we would like, but
I see somebody posting that they just got an Atmos soundbar, which you know, it helps. You know, it still gives you a small percentage of what it's like. So I think it's catching on.
Yeah.
Big
Well, I agree with you wholeheartedly.
I would hope
So I know we've only got a couple of minutes left, and we do have a couple questions that I wanted to pose. Jose, actually, I think this is a good one for you. The question is, how do you see the pandemic changing production protocols going forward? Have you done any production work during the pandemic, or how are things working for you now?
Well, here in New York, during the difficult times between March and May, was pretty much closed. I got a few calls to work on stories about COVID, but I didn't really take them. But after May, then we began some experiments, you know, like I've worked in situations where the producer director don't come and they're on an iPad. There's just the camera, sound, and assistant, and the iPad asks the question, the person responds to it. And we're always trying, you know, everyone wears masks, sometimes do N95, and avoiding miking people, wiring people, trying to record just with stands and booms. But it's picking up. It's not a lot, but I hear people working more and more.
The rest of you, how has COVID affected your post-production work?
It's even more solitary than usual, I suppose. I mean, our building is open now, but there's very strict things to adhere to. If we leave the room, mask, and no clients are in the room. We're doing everything kind of like this and streaming.
We kind of find ourselves on an island when we go into work, and for me, there was always a flood of work, and all of a sudden, because production stopped, hasn't been as much. It's mostly fixes. I have a series on Netflix that's coming up, and I've been doing QC fixes on that. But other than that, the new material won't come in until maybe December, January. Then everybody's going to want to have their show mixed all at the same time, and it's going to create a jam.
I'll be available if you need anything, Joe.
Yeah, the internet says that Bonnie's new show drops on October 30th, so she'll be available.
Yeah, well, we were lucky, because for the shooting had wrapped on the Mandalorian, so it's like, okay, that one's good, but pretty, I don't know, everything else is like
things getting pushed.
So one final question, and this came through. What would you tell young aspiring students of sound mixing design when considering internships? And I would also just tack on, where would you advise students who are interested in this field to get started? Internship, film school, I know everybody has their own path to entry, but any practical advice that any of you would have?
Sure, I'll chime in for a little bit. I think internships are fantastic. I didn't do an internship. I had a couple of friends did it, and it was great. I did a lot of just free work or very cheap work. And, there is a saying that when you're doing cheap work, you're doing a lot of work because it's a ton of work and you're getting paid very little. And then when you get to a professional status, you're getting paid more money, and it's not as botched as, some of these other things. But I think for me, that really helped me get, a good volume of work, but then it helped me understand how to deal with issues, sound effect issues when things are really, really bad. So I would suggest, really talking to as many people as you can and doing work, whether it's, for $200, $300, whatever, you're getting experience, and not being afraid to ask people. I'm a talker. So I talked to a lot of people, and I think that helped me. And, not just asking them, if they have a job, but, just checking to see like, hey, what are you working on? And really kind of making it a conversation instead of always asking, because that's obnoxious when, people are just always asking you for things. So if you can just kind of come alongside people and just see what they're interested in, show, mutual interests in, that, I think people are a little more willing to, either give you work or help you, or, drop their knowledge on you. So that's kind of what worked for me.
Joe, can you talk a little bit about mentoring? I know that's something that's important for you.
Sure. We've actually tried to get more companies out there to sponsor, to mentor young people. And you can't really always get sound houses to do it. There are certain issues with, you cannot, no one's allowed to see this picture before it's released. And so there's certain hiccups there, but at studios and at sound houses, mostly private sound houses, you should just go and you should start. And whether you start in the vault or as a runner or a receptionist, you need to be in the building. And then once you're in the building, you find the person or the place that you belong, and you go and you sit with those people and you talk to them, and you can learn. Each one of us is willing to help. And that's where mentoring really begins. But the Academy is very strong on their mentorship program. And so we'll do more to reach out and see if we can't get more people to mentor, the young.
Great. Well, we've gone a couple of minutes over, but this was really a fun conversation, and it's been a great pleasure for me to spend a little time this afternoon with you, amazing artists, talking about your work. Congratulations on your Emmy nominations. Well deserved, each and every one of you. Bonnie, Jose, Joe, and Logan, thank you so much for participating in the conversation, and congratulations on all the fantastic work. This is Glenn Kaiser from the Dolby Institute, signing off. Thanks, everyone.
Good luck, guys.
All right.
Good luck.
Nice meeting you all.